Times Network's Maroof Raza joins us this evening to further put in perspective the developments of the day. Maroof, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on. I started off the show by giving the latest update at the United Nations and India's vote there. There are several within India, several constituencies within India who say, oh, India must take a moral position, you must condemn Russia, but what that position doesn't take into account is that there is extreme strategic significance behind India abstaining at these votes.
You see, Aarti, classically, that is the kind of response that you get from the liberal lobbies in India. Historically, we have had many pitfalls in foreign policy because we took a moral position. But our moral position in itself became contestable, even under liberals like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. For example, we were critical of the US war in Vietnam, but we were not critical of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia or even the Hungary operations where the Soviet tanks had rolled in, but we were critical of the French-British invasion of the Suez Canal area. So, morality per se doesn't hold much water in international relations. What holds water is that you can back up your argument with facts. Now, what we need to understand is I am not for a moment condoning the Soviet operations in Ukraine to the way it has unfolded. None of us expected that. In fact, forget lesser mortals like me. Even the US intelligence agencies didn't anticipate the way Putin would go about his operations and the way it would unfold and has unfolded. What really irks me is the inability of the people to overlook the atrocities or the sheer human rights abuses that US-led military operations have in the past done. Look at the case of Serbia, Kosovo in 1998-99. They bombed the hell out of that place for 78 days. They didn't even have a UN mandate to do that. So in a way, it's very similar to the 7-day operation that Russian troops are undertaking or have undertaken in Ukraine. The second thing is, when American-led forces went into Iraq and Afghanistan, they argued they were going against dictators, but they had engaged with those dictators, propped them up, and even encouraged them to go into Arab-Arab conflicts like Saddam Hussein's with other neighboring countries. And then later, when he became too big for his boots, they challenged him. Now, why should India get engaged in a conflict that is essentially a European conflict? Why does India's vote matter that much? Does China's vote matter or not? Yes, because China is a P5 member of the UN Security Council. Nobody is asking China that why don't you take sides? And it's the same countries that do business with China with or without the knowledge that China spread the pandemic across the world. There's enough evidence now showing that China had done that. So where did morality go? So I don't buy this nonsense that comes from the Western world. Not that I buy the propaganda that's coming from Russia. But the central point is, you feel so much for Ukraine. You feel so much for Ukraine. Why the hell don't you do something more than give platitudes, money, and a few Stinger missiles? What America could have done, and it enunciated that policy after its withdrawal from Afghanistan, that will provide over-the-horizon support. What does that mean? Common sense dictates it means air support. Did America provide air support to the Ukrainian forces? No.
But Maroof, there is also that risk, and that's where I think the situation is very different from the earlier countries which you mentioned and rightly mentioned as well about a double standard setting in. The big difference here is the threat of nuclear war. If America were to intervene, even if it is by air, also the question is then what is the other option? If they were to intervene, there is always the threat of nuclear war, especially Putin being the kind of man that he is. He's already issued those statements. Now, we don't know whether those are just empty threats or Putin's brinkmanship is actually going to cost the world that high risk.
Well, that's brinkmanship. Let me tell you, those of us who know a little more about nuclear war and nuclear strategy and have studied the subject, we understand that nuclear weapons are weapons of deterrence. They're not for use. Because anybody who uses it, the other side also has the capacity to use it, and then force, counter force, counter force, counter force. That means you'll reach a point where you'll look at the possibility of mutual destruction. Neither Putin wants it, because Putin also doesn't know what lies after death. He doesn't want to die, because all his ambitions are centered around life here. So therefore, this nonsense about everything escalating into nuclear war, you may recall when India tested nuclear weapons in Pokhran, foreign correspondents were running helter and skelter like plucked chicken in Delhi, trying to find somebody to give them a soundbite to say that, oh, now we are going to have a nuclear holocaust in South Asia. We did not. India,
Maroof, Maroof, I'm so sorry to interject you. I really do apologize. Would have loved to keep the conversation going, but I urgently need to go across to the Ministry of External Affairs briefing on the status of the evacuation of Indian students.